My name's Zeo, and in the past 30 plus years I have certainly played my share of RPGs. It's always been my favorite genre as far back as I can remember. So here are 10 RPGs that have been longtime favorites of mine. No online RPGs here, so no PSO, FF11, or FF14. Oh boy, Mother 3. Now, I didn't play this one until pretty recently, and it left one hell of an impression on me for sure. This was the third entry in the Mother/Earthbound trilogy. This one never got an official localization. The first one did, but it went unreleased for quite some time. I played the first two games on and off, but not from start to finish. I went into this one completely blind, on stream no less, and it was a really fun ride. You have a moment or two sons, going to visit their grandpa and they're getting ready to go back home, then shit just pops off. It dealt with some pretty mature subject matter like losing a loved one and the grieving process. It served to illustrate that even though a loved one may be gone, their influence is still with us. The battle system was pretty cool and you could combo normal attacks with the beat of the music. Also, whenever you get hit, your HP isn't subtracted by the amount of damage you just took. This actually saved my ass countless times on certain bosses. It had some really great music too. It really is a shame that this one never came out over here officially. Xenogears. Oh my goodness, Xenogears. This was such a vibe for late teen Zeo. Let's see, it had giant robots, anime, kick-ass music, and it was an RPG. I hadn't really gotten into Gundam yet, and it was still pretty new in the West at the time. I'd heard about it from my time in Japan though. The soundtrack was done by Yasunori Mitsuda and had some real bangers in it. I really enjoyed the characters and the mech fights here. The story had some really deep religious and psychological overtones. A lot of characters and locations got their names from the Bible and other religious texts, which wasn't exactly rare. I think this one would be higher up on the list if it had more time to cook. They ran out of time and Disc 2 was a rush job to get the game out the door. It was a pretty ambitious project for a guy cutting his teeth on directing a game. Some of the main guys behind this game left Square to form Monolith Soft. Secret of Mana. I didn't play this when it was brand new. This one was a fun ride from beginning to end, with its visuals, its music, its characters, just chef smooch. I think that learning about everything the development team went through to make this game back in the day made me appreciate it all the more. I had a lot of fun making the video about it too. Star Ocean 2. Star Ocean's second story, Star Ocean's second evolution, whatever you want to call it. I came away enjoying this one more than I thought I would. This was the first Star Ocean game that we would see outside Japan. This one has some replay value with two main characters. No two playthroughs will be exactly the same just because of the sheer amount of recruitable characters there are. Some characters you can get with Claude but not Rena, and vice versa. They really dialed in the formula here with the relationship system, the paired endings, and the item creation. It got remade recently and the team involved with that did a really good job here. You didn't think I'd make a video like this and not have a Phantasy Star title on here, did you? This is the culmination of everything that was building up since the first game. While there is continuity between Phantasy Star 1, 2, and 4, the game is written so that you don't really have to play those two. I really like the story and the characters and how they conveyed major story beats through comic panels. The music's really good too, despite the Genesis sound hardware. This was actually the first Phantasy Star that I played from start to finish. SEGA always had a much smaller share of the home console market, so games like this flew under most people's radar. That's really a shame though, since this is perhaps the best version of the experience that Phantasy Star sought to provide at the time. So now we're at the halfway mark here, and oh man, this does not get any easier. Final Fantasy VII. One of the most iconic games in history. I had a somewhat unique experience with this game compared to most people. I had spent the better part of a decade living in Okinawa, Japan because my dad was in the Air Force. FF7 came out over there a few months before it was time for my family and I to go back to the US. I had a friend at the time who was an upperclassman and had the dubious honor of doing his senior year at a new school. We're still friends to this day, of course. We started hanging out. Come to find out, he was into a lot of the same shit that I was at the time. One day he mentioned Final Fantasy VII and seeing some guy play it at an arcade just outside the base where I lived. Some of the arcades there actually had home consoles in them. This particular one had a PlayStation, Nintendo 64, even a Super Famicom. These things were bolted to a table and connected to a TV that you had to put money into in order to use it. The TVs were coin operated and you had to put a little bit of yen into them every few minutes to keep them on while you were playing. He and I went to that arcade after school one day along with another friend of ours and we played FF7 for the first time and we were just blown away. He got a PlayStation as a graduation present that year and he'd get a copy of the game and he and I would bumble through it together with the help of a translation guide from Game FAQs. Neither of us really knew a lick of Japanese, so we didn't know what the hell was going on with the story. I did get the English version for Christmas though. I liked the characters in the story. FF7 had an incredible narrative that just kept you guessing and had one of the most impactful scenes in any game. The materia system was pretty cool, and so were the mini-games. This game right here was a system seller for sure, and helped to legitimize RPGs in the West. This was the game that made me double down on the PlayStation. I had both Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, and I think I only had maybe 2 or 3 N64 games. Nintendo really screwed the pooch by doubling down on cartridges with the N64. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, I'm dating a girl who is into anime and I introduce her to Final Fantasy. I lend her my copy of FF7 and then we split up sometime in 2006. We start talking a few months after the split and I ask her to give me back my copy of FF7. She said okay, but never did. Final Fantasy Tactics really took me by surprise. This one was cool because it didn't play anything like your traditional Final Fantasy. The storyline was every bit on par with a mainline title though. It dealt with some heavy issues like government and religious corruption and the damage that propaganda can do. I like what they did here with the job system as well. This one is definitely worth playing however you can. There's the original PlayStation version, and there's also the War of the Lions on PSP, which adds some cutscenes and a new translation. Now we have Final Fantasy VI, or Final Fantasy III, as a lot of us knew it back in the day, in the number 3 spot. Now this was a hard one. So this game dared to be different by not having a central main character, not like Tidus from FF10 or Cecil from FF4. FF6 had an ensemble cast where practically anyone could be the main character. Now some would say that Terra is the main character, and there would be some truth to that in the first half of the game. The real main character here is probably Kefka though. Every single character in the game, apart from Mog, Umaro, and Gogo, was brought together through Kefka's actions. Kefka is also one of the best villains in the franchise. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here when I say this, but this game has some of the best music in the entire franchise. This game and several others helped me survive the hellhole that was middle school. Final Fantasy IV, aka Final Fantasy II, in the number 2 spot. Oh my goodness, this was a hard one. This was one of the first RPGs on the Super NES and felt like a huge quantum leap over FF1. And to be quite honest, it was. This is especially true for us outside Japan since we didn't get 2 and 3 back in the day. This was a huge jump over everything else at the time in terms of presentation and storytelling. You follow Cecil, who is the leader of the mightiest military force in the world, who is sent to round up the crystals at the behest of the king. He and his men start questioning things. Why does the King of Baron, who was like a father to Cecil, want the crystals so badly? I liked watching Cecil grow, not just as a fighter, but as a man along the way. I thought it was cool how this was reflected in game too. And he wasn't the only one to experience that. This game was a watershed moment, not just for the Super Nintendo, but RPGs in general. So why is this one ahead of 6 and even 7, even though both games objectively did things better than this one? Maybe it's a certain N-word. Not that N-word, nostalgia. This one was special because it really started to kindle my love for RPGs. Now, I played FF1, I played Dragon Warrior, but didn't finish either one back in the day. This one just sucked me in. With its world, its characters, its monsters, its music. I rented the game several times during that summer between 5th and 6th grade. Eventually, near the end of that summer, my dad just bought the damn thing for me. If you haven't played this one yet, definitely get the Pixel Remaster along with FF6. Before we get to number 1, I'd like to share a few honorable mentions. Now, this was a tough one, especially with the last two. So what is it that puts Chrono Trigger above everything else here? Now, we've seen the idea of time travel implemented with varying degrees of success over the years. Very few games and movies incorporate time travel yet still maintain a coherent narrative. And yet Chrono Trigger manages to do just that. In an era where video games were still very much an emerging art form, this game pushed the Super NES to its limits, and still holds up to this day. This game is just bursting with personality, from its characters to its locales across different eras of time. This game is one of the most iconic soundtracks of any RPG, or dare I say, any video game ever made. You also have a fresh take on JRPG combat at the time, with combination attacks based on who's in your party. And let's not forget the multiple endings. There's a reason the core people who worked on this game were called the Dream Team. You had Hironobu Sakaguchi, the father of Final Fantasy, Yuji Horii, the man behind Dragon Quest, and of course the iconic art style of Akira Toriyama. So everything I just said here makes Chrono Trigger a truly once-in-a-lifetime experience. There's just nothing out there like it, past or present. Square tried to recapture that magic a few years later with a sequel called Chrono Cross, but that ultimately missed the mark. The music was great though. Square Enix has been on a huge remaking and remastering kick as of late, especially with HD 2D. They usually farm this work out to other companies, and I don't think anyone has the balls to touch this one. If you haven't played this one yet, it would definitely behoove you to do so. So these are my personal top 10 RPGs of all time. It was really hard not to fill this up with Squaresoft titles. I mean, what can I say? Those guys could practically do no wrong before the turn of the century. So what are some of your favorites? I know some of you are bound to mention a few that I may have slept on back in the day. You know how much I love chopping it up with you guys in the comment section and on streams. Come on by and hang out sometime, we'd love to have you. Anyway, that's a wrap. I hope you have a blessed day. And remember, to thine own self be true. Until next time, farewell.